Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, or at least for today I am. And today I am joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay? Oh, you're not going to do that? No. You did. But there's a minute
I'm not sure I'm doing it right.
Yeah, the
Insert weird
chittering
clicking here.
noise. Yeah, that weird chittering noise really is incredibly creepy. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be talking about 1998's Dark City. I watched the theatrical cut of this because that's what I ended up downloading and double checked. But what about yourself? Did you watch the theatrical cut?
I watched the director's cut.
Oh, you did? Excellent. So I was going to make
Yes.
sure. Yes. I thought I was getting the director's cut, but then when I downloaded it, I noticed it was the original theatrical cut. So we've now got both versions covered, which is good.
Excellent.
But let's start this. So what are your initial thoughts then around Dark City?
I am pretty confident I have never seen this all the way through. And I kind of love it. I'm really glad that you made me go back and actually watch it attentively. It strikes me that it is, I don't think it's as classic as The Man Who Fell to Earth, but, it's a year before The Matrix, and it's sort of like what you know is wrong. I consistently thought, like, this was how I saw the world as a teenager. Like, this was, like, a totally solipsistic, like, I'm not sure that any of my memories are real. Obviously, we live in some sort of simulation. I would have, if I saw this at, 14, I would have said that is absolutely, a representation of the truth. In exactly the kind of like paranoid ways, like the sort of like when the Berenstain Bears thing became big, I was like, oh yeah, I was reading about that 20 years earlier. I was
Mandela
convinced.
effect.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that was well discussed, in weird circles years before. And I was absolutely like, oh no, that's happened in my life. I can point to these things. Reality is not consistent in some way. So it's kind of creepy watching it. It does sort of like come off as a little Terry Gilliam, a little
massive
weird.
influence. Yeah.
Nosferatu's in here, but it's, you can also see like it's incredibly influential. Sorry, I'm going on. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree. This is the second time I've watched this film. And it's one of those that if I take it into two elements, stylistically, I love everything about this film. Like everything that is on screen to me is wonderful. Like it's just something about this film I just find so appealing. The design, sort of the aesthetic, the costuming. I mean, you said about Nosferatu is one element, and I think Hellraiser, like this really sort of like the costuming and stuff, the set design, even sort of like there's some charming stuff like the early use of sort of CGI. It's not sort of like it's not as terrible, and there's some moments when it looks really dated, but I'm involved because it's got model shots and stuff in here as well that I really like. But then the story as well, like you say, this is sort of one of a couple. Like everyone talks about The Matrix in 1999 as sort of like, oh, the epitome of sort of 90s sci-fi and this idea of sort of the Matrix. And people refer to The Matrix as being like, this thing around whether or not we exist in a simulation or sort of stuff. But this, like you said, this came a year before. Before this, there's a film called The 13th Floor, which I would like us to cover at something like. Now, this is really prevalent and I think the X-Files even touched on it at one point, this notion that the X-Files may exist in a simulation. Like, this idea of simulation theory and something not being quite right births in the late 90s. And I just find that fascinating, that sort of, I don't know really why that is. I don't know what the cultural sort of zeitgeist was that was generating it. But yeah, this film was directed, and sort of you can see the style in there by the same person who directed The Crow, another film that I think is wonderful. So yeah, I did this film.
Certainly very stylistic and
Yes.
has a vision. Yeah.
Yeah, and you as you say, Terry Gilliam influence all over this. But I love the fact that and there are things I wish they do slightly different in the story, but that this sort of noir take on things as well, sort of like when you're inside the world, this sort of 30s, sort of 40s vision of things and sort of the characters I love it. I just think it's all looks, the way it's lit, the way it's filmed. This is just a really cool film.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it compares favorably to, I think the first Matrix is actually a really good movie, but I think this compares favorably, arguably to that, and certainly to most of the other sort of everything is wrong movies that came out at that time. I even think, like, in Inception, with the moving of the buildings, is a sort of like better CGI version of what you're getting here, but you're getting buildings moving a whole lot, and that's really awesome to see this changing. I really am fascinated by a lot of these themes. Obviously, we've talked, and I'm very sympathetic to simulation theory. I basically would say, I think it's better than 50% chance. But I don't think it affects anything, right? I don't think you go out there and say, I mean, if you're in The Sims, it's like, well, what is it that makes me happy, right? There's no win condition, right? So, but I am fascinated by this idea of memory. I mean, I've had at least 3 serious head injuries or things happen to my brain in my life. All 3 shook me up. All 3, 2 of them, I had my memories altered. After one, I had no short-term memory, no ability to form long-term memory, and really devastated me. I didn't know who I was as a person. And the other one, I had my memories scattered so that, places and people and events and what they said were all mixed up like note cards, just reassigned to other people and places. And I was like, who am I? So at the end, where the doctor has inserted himself into the guy's memories, that's, first of all, cool as hell.
Yes.
I wish they played it up more, but also, like, that would be unbelievably upsetting, having gone through that experience where you're remembering things that are wrong.
Yeah.
And I mean, that, like, you just break down. Like, that is, I guarantee nobody's ever had that experience and not collapsed emotionally. To know, like, oh, wait, that guy couldn't have been in my childhood, but I was in that classroom. And I feel the anxiety of not knowing the answer, of being in that classroom, of being worried what Mary next to me thinks about me, except my teacher's now this guy I know wasn't my teacher. Does that invalidate my feelings? What was I, who am I? Yeah, so I love these. I love this movie.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, this idea of memory, we'll get back to, because it's one of the big themes of this, or I see it as a big theme of this film, is this idea of self, this idea of identity, and how much your memory and your history makes up who you are. And if you are told that that's, not just false, but you've had multiple versions of that, and it's malleable and it's being manipulated. I actually think some of the reactions of Rufus Sewell's character is underplayed. Like you say, I'd be like, "What? You don't know who you are. You don't know what means this, and what makes me. What's my morality?" Because at one point, I like the fact that, like you say, that so it's sort of required, because the plot is actually, or the motivation for all this is quite intricate. What do you mean? The fact they've actually made him at one point a serial killer to see what would happen. So he has these sort of like flashes of memory of being that and sort of stuff. And like, I could have been that, but
He
then
hasn't actually killed anyone,
no, he
right?
hasn't. No, they gave him the memories at
Yeah,
one point of
but then he
doing
has
that.
the memory, right? And they've set
Yeah.
him up. The whole point is to sort of see, would you continue this if you had the memories?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the idea. Like, they've generated these memories of him
Yeah.
killing these 5 or 6 women, and then they've set up the world to be chasing him down to see what would happen. Like, they keep experimenting with it. And so yeah, you're going, well, you know, if that's false memory, so at what point where's the real? Because one of the things that sort of I find interesting about this story is the reveal at the end, which we'll have to talk about the plot a little bit, but the reveal at the end, and as we always say, spoilers, because we're going to go into this in a great deal of detail. When it's revealed that this is a spaceship and these are aliens and all that sort of stuff, they finally built it. It's a spaceship going through space. But he's had these memories of this place, this beach, and all this other stuff of him being a kid, right? And you do see that there are children that live in Dark City, in the city. So that the potential of him having been a child there is one thing, and he comes across this billboard on this wall of this place, and you go, fine. So that also goes back to me, like, how far ago, how long ago were these people abducted? How many generations have been living in Dark City? You know, so how long has this been happening? How long has this been going on? Like, it's really sort of like it's never addressed. It's never really even been raised. But like, at one point, I almost thought, if you watch it, I'm like, oh, he must have been abducted as a child, and some of these memories are of the real Earth. And then you realize they're not. Like, it's all there inside this spaceship. So he's been there his entire life, and you're like, okay, well, he's in his 30s. So like, how long has these people been there? Like, it's really. There's no real, there's no answers to any of this at the end. It's really sort of fascinating. So yeah, no, I think it's really weird how this thing does take on this idea of identity and where we come from, and really allows you to question sort of like, what is your origin and stuff.
Yeah, and I find these very resonant, you know, even beside simulation theory. Like, you know, if you think, and my own experience was shaking up my brain, if you think about our experiences, like, you know, we say, well, you know, like, I'm loyal to my mom, she took care of me when I was a kid, right? I'm loyal to my brother. Yeah, we fought terribly, we hated each other, but we were always there for each other when we needed somebody, right? If an outside threat was there or somebody was sick, I mean, you wanted the other brother in your corner. Well, what if those are false memories? What if those are, you know, like, you know, it's like where people discover, true or false, you know, a memory of like, dad molested me. Well, if that's true, well, first of all, there are cases where that's been provably false. There are cases where it's pretty clearly true. If that's true, then obviously that changes your happy memories and your feeling of like, I had a happy childhood and I should be loyal to this person. If that's false, then, you know, it changes, you know, all of that incorrectly, right? So, I mean, I think that our loyalties and our personalities are often very tied up with memory and things that really are arbitrary. You know, including a lot of our life lessons. A lot of our morality is bound up in memory and sort of like feeling good about helping somebody, feeling bad about hurting somebody. We learn how to be a good person by observing those effects, right? Go ahead.
No, I was agreeing. I agree totally, 100%. The thing with memory is as well is it's like not straightforward, is it? You know, you're saying about the generation, this corruption, like an entire panic, and you know, one of my sort of like, as you know, one of my sort of favorite mini subjects is the satanic panic of the 70s, 80s, 90s. Like that sort of kicks off with a lot of people claiming and generating false memories of, you know, or ritual sacrifice and all this other stuff that has no evidence other than these claims made by people that when I was a kid, this is what happened, and they're like, oh my god, you have
Clearly
memories
never
of
happened.
it. Yeah,
clearly never happened. And in one case, there was a girl who was supposedly like abducted and raped by 3 different satanic cults.
Yeah.
You know, it was
yeah.
This did not happen. What, you know, but apparently believed it. I mean, I have no reason to think.
Yeah, 100% people believe it. No, but you're right. This thing, people believed it. Like, it changed the way that law enforcement was being done, social care across sort of like many Western countries. But the thing is, you're right. This thing about false memories, but it's also been proven repeatedly now that people giving statements in court cannot be 100% trusted, because they'll be like, What did you witness? Well, what you witnessed is what you remember you witnessed, and actually, as I think we now know, you don't remember anything. When you recall a memory, what you're doing is you're recalling the last time you remembered that memory.
Right. Every time you take it out and look at it,
It's
you put
slightly
it back
degraded.
different.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, yeah, our memories are not
But
what we
these
think they are.
witnesses, they really saw what they think they saw, and you have these conflicting accounts where somebody, I
Exactly.
mean, this is the difference in somebody's life, but they
Yeah.
will be adamant.
Yes.
And, somebody will be a crusader for somebody's innocence and another one for convicting them, and they both are clearly breaking down in tears, adamant. Clearly, this is, a memory that has affected their whole life. It's tied to emotion, right?
Exactly. And I think, and more than that as well, we know that certain chemical stimulus will completely affect the way we remember things. So if you've been taking drugs or drinking or even heightened adrenaline and all these other things, cortisol, whatever in your body, will completely impact the way you remember events or the way your memories are stored. Traumatic memories are stored in a certain way compared to happy memories. Like the brain does things differently for these chemical reactions. And so this idea of, like you say, of self being so intrinsically tied to this idea of memory is true. And once you remove that, all of a sudden, like, it is horrifying. Like, you're right. If you were to take away like who you were or my memories of who I am, I think that really does scare me. If you were to wake up, that it's funny. It's one of those weird sort of, like, you get those irrational phobias of something that's clearly never going to happen, or hopefully will never happen. But like, I have that fear of sort of waking up with no memory. That you see it in a number of films, much like in this, where Rufus Sewell's character, John, wakes up in a bathtub, and it's like he's got no memory of who he is or what's going on. Like I have that fear, and it's sort of how I portray that is I am terrified of getting Alzheimer's. I am definitely terrified of getting dementia. Really worries me. And I think that's the case, because you do start to lose that identification of self. And so, yeah, no, so it does play out a little bit in that sort of this being really sort of start picking at those, like, potential wounds or those sort of concerns and worries.
Yeah, and I mean, I've often had experiences like that. I have sometimes, like, say you go into your backyard, you expect there to be a pool, and you think, I don't think I'm going to see it this time. You know, I have sometimes come back to my apartment, not where I currently live, but years ago when I was a younger man, and I do think my brain has stabilized a lot. And when I say, like, this would have been a really bad movie for me to see at 14, yeah, I mean it. It would have been a bad movie for me to see at 24, and pretty safe for me to see at 34. But yeah, I mean, I have come back to my apartment in my 20s and the early 30s and thought, there were police inside this apartment. I have murdered somebody today, and I don't remember doing it. I'm looking and I'm like, is there blood on my hands? Did I clean that off? But I'm pretty convinced that I straight up murdered somebody, and that, like, police are hiding in my apartment waiting for me to enter. Which doesn't make sense, but I have to force myself to open that door, thinking, I know this isn't rational, but I, at the same time, kind of believe that this is true. So I mean,
No, but the brain is
I
weird like that, isn't it? 'Cause I've had something similar where I've woken up from a dream. I've woken up from a vivid
yeah.
dream that involved me at, and this can sound like I'm not confessing things on. Are we? I don't know. Is this too bizarre? But you have those dreams where you have that sort of, like, I couldn't tell you what the total dream is, but I've woken up thinking I have done something terrible, and there's going to be consequences, but I can't really tell you what it is, and that overhanging feeling of dread and guilt, and I'm like, I did something in a dream and I feel really bad about it, and that's weird. But also, you say about this, this thing. One of the things that this struck me about this film is when you see them do the tuning, and I love the scenes when them doing the tuning. They say the chattering of teeth, or the noises they make. but the building changing. One of the things it made me think about is there are places in your life, like, so I was raised in Coventry. I now live elsewhere. I went to university in Leicester. I haven't really been there for sort of years. But you have a memory of that place. You have very vivid memories, especially of, the town or city you were born in, where you grew up. You worked there. Then I went to university, and I have very vivid memories of going out and existing and living in that town or that city.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go back, and there's been gentrification or improvements and renovations, and that city is no longer the city that you knew. But people that still live there walk around that city like it's normal. They walk around because they know it. And you have that sort of, like, you're an outsider, but you have that sort of distortion because you're going, well, I used to take this route from here, turn here and do this and do that and do that to get to this other place. Well, firstly, that other place doesn't exist anymore because it's now something else. But also, I can't do that route anymore because it's been, it's now blocked off, or there's a building in the way, or there's something else there. And that level of sort of like, this is no longer the place. That place I grew up in, or that place I lived in, doesn't exist anymore, only in my head. And I find that it can sometimes be really disconcerting. In Coventry in particular is one of those places where, since I moved away in my 20s, it's been like 15 years really since I've lived there, that when I do, the few times I do go back to like the town centre, the city centre, it's very much a university town now and stuff. And there's big buildings that have gone up, renovations have gone up, there's new sort of like entertainment things. And I'm like, yeah, none of this was here the last time I was here. Like last time I really studied the place, or I lived here. And it does feel a bit like Dark City, where I'm like, I blinked, because time goes a lot quicker when you're older. I've blinked, and all of a sudden, this city, this town centre, the city centre, is completely different, and I can't. I have this image in my mind's eye that I struggle to reconcile with what I'm seeing now, and I think that's totally true. The way things change.
Well, I've had kind of the opposite experience with Hawaii. I have had that experience with, like, where I went to school. In Hawaii, when I lived here in the 2000s, I thought, like, things changed all the time, and they changed really fast. And just because it was, expensive, you would, not go past a store in a week. You pass it again, and it's, a completely different store. And it looks like it's always been that store. And you're like, did I hallucinate that it was this other store? Like, how did this change this severely? And people are going there like they've always gone there. And you're like, how did this happen? But then, moving back, I thought, oh, a few things have changed, but it's remarkable how similar it is. But then there are these experiences of where you say, like, oh, no, I've never been to that place. And your friend is like, oh, no, we went together, and has clear memories of it. Or, I mean, it could work in reverse where you have the memory. But it's more creepy when all of sorts, oh, no, like, I've never seen that movie. I've never been to that place. And my friend will say, oh, yes, we have, and recount things that clearly that was me, right? Like, clearly I believe that. They have no reason to lie about this in specific memories. And I'll defer to them. My dad once watched videotape, recorded on a Super 8 camera of himself back in Eagle River, Wisconsin, where he grew up. And he said, that never happened. I never went back there. Looking at the footage of himself.
Yeah.
Because he was like, that I don't have any memory of this. I reject my eyes. Your lying eyes.
Yeah. It's interesting how timelines work in that way, isn't it? Like, in my head, I have a series of events that lead up throughout my life, and then I know I can speak to somebody else, and they'll go, "Oh, no, this one happened before that one." And so you might see that video footage and say, "Well, no, I don't have no memory of that. I have memories of those events, but I'm sure they took place at least a year or 2 years before that." And someone else go, "No, you're getting that switched up with this or whatever." Like, yeah, memory is incredibly complex and not, which does make you sort of, this is when we sort of talk about, I did history as a degree, and so I've sort of this idea, and they talk about primary sources, someone at the event, and even as like you're looking at these primary sources, so like one of the big things that in English history, one of those big things is a guy called Samuel Pepys, who was well known, and he sort of kept a series of diaries, recording
There's so
events.
much that we only know about from his diaries.
Exactly. There's a whole load
Yeah.
of stuff from sort of like the 1600s, including like the plague and the Great Fire and all this other stuff of Great Fire of London, just recorded in his diaries. And everyone goes, "Oh, that's an account." And you go, "It is. It clearly is." But it doesn't take into account the fact is sort of like his position in society, but also like it's just what he remembers of that day or that time. Like, I don't. Did he journal every day? Did he write it down all the time? Like, how is that different to what actually happened? And people take it as fact. So even primary sources, you have to be very careful with what is being recounted.
Well, and it's true, like, when we go back to, historians of the ancient world, they all leave out, and Pepys does too. Like, we know this happened on this day. Why is that not in his journal, right?
Yeah.
Why would this not be recorded? And some things it's like, oh no, this historian would have mentioned that. That's some good evidence that didn't actually happen. Like say killing the firstborn children when Jesus was born or something. But then there's other stuff where it's just like, yeah, these guys disagree and nobody knows what the hell the truth is.
Yeah.
The other thing is our memory, like I used to be able to remember, and I can't because I don't care about independent issues anymore, but I used to be able to remember what happened in every issue of Action Comics, every issue of, Flash and Superman. I could tell you, within a month, the, publication date. I mean, I knew all this stuff and I didn't try to memorize it. I just cared about it. And now I know, whatever I'm reading, whatever I'm studying, I know really well. But ask me what I had, for breakfast, and I may pause and not be able to tell you. And I really like how there's a scene in the movie where the main character is talking to the detective, and he says, like, when was the last time you remember it being light out?
Yeah.
Doing anything in the day. And I thought, it reminded me of like how often, it's like 50% of people or something can't recall what they had for breakfast that morning. I mean, we don't remember. It goes into the real short-term memory and just gets expunged most of the events of our day, especially where things are repetitive. And we assume that we did things that we didn't. And people are often shockingly wrong when you ask them about, showering and brushing and eating habits and, things like this.
Driving. That
Yes.
thing of you drive somewhere, you drive repeatedly, and you get there, and you're like, I have no memory of the journey I just took.
Yeah, which is for me one argument for new experience and novelty and the importance of traveling and trying new things, and the fact that it scares you and you've never done it. Right, sign your family up for it because it's good for your brain. But no, I think most of us kind of sleepwalk through our days. But the interesting thing is, then we still care. It's like there's this interesting sort of thing of how the cop is like, I don't know that it matters catching this killer anymore, but I'm still going to try to do it, right? Because that's like, and I think that's so true to life that like we don't know sometimes like how we got in this room. Like what was I coming here to do? I don't remember. I don't remember the drive here. I don't remember, like what I did earlier today. But I know that I'm focused on X. X still matters to me. Why? I have no, but I'm still gonna try to do X.
Well, I think you're 100% right. And I think the other thing to do, when you look at some of the characters in this, especially sort of like, the detective, but also when they go off and you see them doing the tuning as well, and you see the world sort of changing and stuff. One of the things that's interesting is that, we often are so absorbed by the micro, like what it is we are doing in the moment, that we don't observe or don't sort of register the macro. So yeah, when he does say, when was the last time you saw daylight? And he's a bit like, I've been so involved in this case, or I've been so involved in this thing that it's never just, even what's interesting is, even as a viewer, because they hold it in this sort of, neo-noir sort of styling. Even as a viewer, like the thing is that Rufus Sewell's character, John, is actually almost asking the audience at that point, going like, when was the last time you saw daylight? And as a viewer, you're going like, oh yeah, no, this entire film has been dark. Like I never thought about it. Like it just seems to happen at night the entire time. And so I like the fact that even then you're like, it throws you for a loop because you just dropped into it and it's dark and it sort of carries on. And so I like the fact that, yeah, you are sort of challenged on that view. You go like, what's your memory of this film? Do you remember it being daylight? And you go like, well, no.
But that's true that, I at that same point had that same thought. I think that's a brilliant point, the sort of like meta challenging point, because, I also thought, oh, that's true, but I never identify that as a problem. Right? Yeah, oh yeah, we're skipping the days, right? I never thought, oh, this film is screwing up. And then that illustrates my brain is as shitty at daily memory as these
Yeah.
characters are. I'm
Yeah.
implicated in a really cool way.
And I think that's what I like about it. It does it sort of, it keeps doing these little things about sort of challenging you as a viewer, because it does that same thing later on when he goes to meet his uncle, and he is told all this stuff about us being a childhood. You say about that, and he opens the book. He's got this book that was like a recounting of this summer on the beach and all this other stuff, and he opens it and nothing in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's again like we were saying, like, you are challenged about what your past is. You're being shown these memories. You are shown in like flashback in some sort of like video footage, whatever, him filling in this book, and then he has a blank copy, and he's like, "Well, where's the content?" And they're like, "Well, it's this, that." And so you are challenged repeatedly to sort of like parcel out what it is you're being shown, and what you are shown repeatedly is the past doesn't matter in this film, in this world. And so as a viewer, you are left questioning sort of like, what are the events that are supposed to have happened? And it's not a big the thing is, this is one of the things I would like to I would have changed about this film a little bit maybe, is the mystery element of it. But I like the fact that you are as a viewer sort of challenged sort of like to question your view of memory and stuff like that, and as well as sort of like how this world works. I want to sort of just remove, because there's something we haven't really got into the plot, and it's worth sort of noting.
Yeah,
because I want to sort of talk about the cast as well, actually, in this film, because the plot's quite it's relatively sort of straightforward. It starts with Rufus Sewell's character John waking up in a bathtub, surrounded by there's a broken syringe on the floor, and there's some other bits and pieces. He doesn't know who he is. He has no memory of his past or who he is. And then as he goes out into the street, so he comes across these other things, and then he experiences everybody falling asleep, and the world sort of like, changes. And what we find out is that there is a bunch of overlords called the Strangers, that are experimenting on these people. And at midnight every night, they tune the world and they change things. And somehow John has now got the ability to not be put to sleep, like he's not affected by this thing, and is able to experience it. And we are introduced to Kiefer Sutherland's character, who is a doctor, like a traitor to the human race, and is there helping to conduct these experiments, and eventually sort of like then helps John to confront this thing. But at the same time, John is being pursued because it is believed he is a serial killer that has been killing a series of prostitutes, because his wife cheated on him, I think, is sort of the motivation, which is a bit shallow. And his wife is played by Jennifer Connelly, who is also trying to help the detectives. It all gets very sort of mingled in that sort of neo-noir way, but the overall plot is Dark City real or not? And you have a detective, which was Ian Hurt's former colleague, who's gone insane and is sort of going off about this conspiracy theory about, and you see these swirls, these sort of concentric circles being drawn and stuff, and eventually it is revealed it's a spaceship in space, and these things, the Strangers are looking to experiment on humans to see if they can protect their own species from something. We're not entirely sure what.
Yeah, I mean, it's said that they're dying and they're trying to understand the human soul and, the role of memory in what makes us unique, because they have a collective memory and a collective experience, which I'm not sure that they really do in the film, but I mean, like, at least that's an explanation. I don't need another dying race, like that needs human individualism, to save it. I mean, that's quite a cliche. But I would say one of the things that I like about this movie is that it sort of starts as a murder mystery, He
Well,
wakes
your
up.
version does. Let's be clear. Your version does.
Oh, okay.
So this is the thing. So there's a Blade Runner-esque change between the theatrical version and the director's cut. Yours cut does not start with Kiefer Sutherland giving a monologue at the beginning of the film, does it?
No.
Yeah, mine does, and basically tells you exactly what the fuck is going on.
What does he say?
Basically, there were these things called the Strangers. They came and they.
I'm not even sure they're called the Strangers in the director's cut.
No, they're not. They do not. They are not given names in the director's cut because this is something I was trying to find out. And
Yeah,
so,
because when you mentioned that, I was like, oh, should I make a point of that? Like, yeah, okay.
yeah, that's what they're called in the theatrical cut. There's a very much like a Blade Runner kind of history where it was watched and the executives were like, "We don't understand this. We want someone."
Bring in Harrison Ford again.
Yes,
to do a
he's not even in the film, but we want Harrison Ford to do a really bored narration. But Kiefer Sutherland steps into that role.
Makes a great sci-fi movie, so let's roll the dice on that.
Yeah.
Harrison.
So Kiefer Sutherland actually has a monologue or a narration over the start of the film and pretty much explains a lot of things. So there's no mystery. There's a bit of a murder mystery, but the mystery around the strangers, the beings, these alien beings, is not really a mystery. Like the fact it's in space still is, but there's no mystery around who that they are there. And so, yeah, the reason I want to see the director's cut is because it is definitely played out more of a mystery, which I think would work a hell of a lot better.
I don't think it's enough of a mystery, but
I agree.
So the way the director's cut starts is with him waking up, and he sort of has slapped this syringe out of a guy's hand, and he's told. I think the guy tells him, who winds up being the doctor, tells him, like they're coming for you. You've got to leave, sort of Matrix style, and he flees, and he's able to use his powers to escape. So, the mystery is, and he sees this woman who's been carved up with these swirls on her, so ostensibly it, and I think this is sort of what maybe it wants to do, or probably what it should do. I think it should start as a murder mystery in this kind of strange film noir city, right? And that murder mystery is tied up in like a lot of, you think like True Detective, you can think, of, even like Chinatown and classic, noir, Sam Spade stuff. Like those murder mysteries were always tied into, or those crimes were always tied into some larger conspiracy, right? Here, the indications of that is, what are these swirls? Actually, very True Detective, right? Like, what are these sort of the swirl pattern? It's tied to fingerprints, like it made the previous guy go crazy. And then the investigation of that mystery winds up exposing a large truth in classic detective fashion, except that here that large truth is your reality is a sham, and we're all alien, community of alien abductees, as opposed to like there's a rich person who's having sex with his daughter,
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of classic film noir. The problem with that is that you see the main character has his superpowers right away, right? So you already know something is amiss. This is, and you also see the, Nosferatu, too quickly, very quickly, you don't know who they are, but very quickly you see them sort of flying around and you realize, okay, something's going on here.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, actually. So the director, the theatrical is very, very similar. It's, it introduces those like noir elements, and I think there's slightly less of Keith Sutherland at the beginning telling him things. Like I think just in yours, does he save a fish as well? Like there's a goldfish.
Oh yeah.
So which becomes not important, but becomes a bit of a point later on when they say sort of
meaning
like,
he's a good guy.
Why would he kill? Killer. Yeah, exactly. Which is not true because serial killers do all kinds of weird stuff.
Right.
I like the fact they do try to show these things. But he has the same. I have exactly the same problem with this film. Whilst I really enjoy this film, I really wanted it to be more of a a gut punch when you realize that there is something supernatural or something even stranger going on, because you are introduced to the sort of bizarre elements way too quickly, and so I think that it should be teased out more.
Yeah, it should roll out like peeling an onion, right? Like you have the first, sort of telekinetic thing, and then you have like creating a door, you have these weird people, and you see, oh, they're kind of able to do these small things too. And then when you see like, I mean, I'm not sure why they have to tune buildings to such an extent. Supposedly they've been doing this for, years, if not decades. Why are they redesigning so much of the city? But it looks cool as hell, and that should be a kind of gut punch, when you see it.
And I think that should come a bit later. I think there should be more. Yeah, the tuning should come later, because I think like the being, let's call them the strangers, because that's what they're so referred to, kept in the shadows, as it were, like almost on the periphery. You could see them and you could acknowledge them, but like they should be almost like the Men in Black kind of thing, of like you do not know what they are.
Agents in the Matrix.
Exactly, like they're there, but you're not entirely sure what they're there for. They're clearly like a menace, but they're not there to interfere per se. Like they're observing, because they should be observing. That's the point. Like they should be observing. And so I agree. The moment this sort of kicks into, it wants to be, like I said, I have to say, like there's a need for this to be more like weird fiction at the beginning, at least for the first 20 minutes to 30 minutes. But it wants to get into the sci-fi weirdness too quickly, for my opinion. But I agree. But I still love the aesthetic of all this stuff as it running around. And then you talk about those older noir films. One of the things I think is they often give you like a single narrative, don't you? You're either following the detective and he's the one that's passing out the information, like you say, Jack Nicholson in Chinatown, or Humphrey Bogart as Sam Spade, or whatever. Like you're following, they're the ones that are passing out the information, like, and they're always on the back foot. That's the point of these noir films, is often the person that's trying to put the mystery together is on the back foot, like they're being prevented from doing something. And so in this case, the detective played by William Hurt, it should be like there's a counter. There's always that police person that's sort of like, you don't know everything, or you don't know what you're doing, kind of thing. And the thing is, like Rufus Sewell, whilst trying to put the thing together, is also, like you say, has these superpowers that sort of pop up, and so it never feels really like, I almost feel like I should be following William Hurt as the one, because you've already had the crazy detective. So there's almost like this, because they split it between Rufus Sewell and William Hurt's characters about who's passing out the information. It does sometimes feel a little bit murky about how this mystery is being parceled out, and I really feel like one or the other. Really sort of leaning to one or the other. But I doesn't mean that's a minor thing, because I think it works overall. But the other thing I got to say, like the cast. Sorry, go on.
I just want to say real quick that it's amazing how like The Matrix is in some sense a dumber, it's certainly less interesting film in some ways than this. And I that's not to trash it again. I think I think if anything the original Matrix is underrated. Having said that, it does such a good job of rolling out the idea that Neo is the one, right? And to me, that's exactly what this is missing. That he's special. He's not just somebody who's been accused of a murder and strangely has powers, right? He's the only human who has these powers.
Yes.
Something strange and special about him. And instead, I mean, imagine if we saw Neo creating holes in walls 10 minutes into The Matrix, it'd be a very different, less satisfying movie that does a good job of rolling out that information.
No, I agree, and that's exactly right. Is that sort of the pacing of that information, and you as a viewer should be involved in the mystery in the same way. And this film does it, like we said before, about that sort of, the darkness and sort of like how it wants you to be a part of the experience, the mystery experience, but then also fails to give you the full mystery. Like him being attacked by the strangers when they are on the platform, like there's a big billboard, isn't there?
Billboard, yeah.
All that, I like all that, but like they fly up, they do all this stuff, and you're supposed to be like, oh my god, who are these? Well, you've told me, because Kiefer Sutherland's already told me who these people are. Like reduce their capabilities as well. make them less sort of supernatural. Like
Yeah.
you should they survive and stuff, but like do it slightly different. What I would say as
In
well,
my
though,
version, Kiefer Sutherland doesn't have that narration. So in my
yes,
version, it is exactly what you're saying. It
and
works.
and I think the director's cut sounds. I wanted to watch the director's cut because I think it sounds like a much better version. I do want to touch on the fact that Rufus Sewell never went on to become a massive star that I think sort of some people thought he was going to in the sort of the 90s. He's been in a few things since. Well, he's been in lots of things since, but just never became the sort of star. But this cast, I do want to highlight the use of this cast. Like, I think Rufus Sewell is good at this as the main character. Kiefer Sutherland is great. I think Kiefer Sutherland is one of their sort of strangely underrated actors. I always find him entertaining.
Mhm.
Jennifer Connelly's fine.
I think she's very good, actually.
Yeah.
I found her kind of haunting.
Yeah, she's, I think, good, especially when they sort of keep changing her. And there's a great scene at the end where they call her by a different name. And she says, "That's not my name." And the guy sort of looks at her like, it's going to be. William Hurt.
I found her performance and her character really one of the fascinating aspects of this.
William Hurt, I really enjoy William Hurt. But the three sort of that separate me. Richard O'Brien as Mr. Hand, Ian Richardson as Mr. Book, and Bruce Spence as Mr. Warlock. These characters, but Richard O'Brien in particular. I think Richard O'Brien is a national treasure in this country. Like he is wonderful whenever he appears on screen, and he is brilliantly, amazingly creepy in this film. I love him in this, and he's absolutely fantastic. And the design of like this sort of like almost like this Pinhead Hellraiser-esque sort of like leather, sort of like, all right, Neo had a leather overcoat. These dudes are wearing like a full leather sort of like smock
with like the collars up and stuff.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's almost like
real creepy.
It's almost like monastic. Like they've got all that stuff, and they wear the overcoats and the hats and all that. They're clearly tapping into like the Men in Black, UFO kind of sort of like just expectation idea. And so that's what I'm saying. I love the aesthetic and why I love how creepy and weird this is, and stuff like that. But yeah, the way it looks is a big part of this. I think the design elements really work. And also just the weirdness of, like you say, when they do the tuning. And I don't think they do like a full city redesign every night. I think there's almost like, tonight we're going to do a little tweaking here, a little tweaking there, and then we'll do a full rebuild at some other point down the line.
But multiple whole buildings are being created
and destroyed.
I mean, yes. I mean, that to me is maybe excessive, but I am like the architecture dude. Like I will do the autistic thing of just like totally ignoring the human beings in the scene and just looking at the architecture behind them and going like, I like that chandeliers and look at the the Gothic positioning here. So for me, like watching the buildings move and stuff, and nothing. To me, there's probably no better scene than when the building is sliding together and crushing the fire escape.
Yeah,
that's probably for me just like the best scene in this movie. How do you beat that?
Well, I love the fact as well because I like the scenes of the tuning. There's two sides to the tuning which I love. I love that when they goes to the strangers and they're in their sort of their area and
with the weird clock.
Yeah, and they all turn to it and they all start that like chattering noise, and they're all these bold, white, pale figures, and some are children, like they have children in these things. Really creepy, really well done. And then you see the city changing and morphing. And you say one of the things I really appreciate is that I think they understand the limitations of the computer animation at the time, so they're not going to go whole hog. But there are some model shots in this that show things, and then they use the morphing technology when they're in that. There's a great shot where it's two people in sort of like a small apartment, a husband and wife, and they're talking about one's going, "Yeah, I'm going to be taking off the night shift, and it's this and that," and they've got the two kids in bunk beds, and then they're like, "Okay, well, we're going to switch those up now. We're going to give them new memories, and they're going to be a really, an upper class, rich, wealthy couple." And so, like, the table extends, and there's sort of like meals appear.
That's a brilliant, fantastic moment. That is really awesome, isn't that?
And the fireplace becomes this massive grand thing, and all this stuff starts changing. But whilst it's happening, like Kiefer Sutherland is still just doing his task. Like he's pulling the syringes out with the new memories, and he'll say like, oh, aren't you a lucky one? Or you're lucky what you wake up with tomorrow. And then when it cuts, and then the people start to wake up, and they just start talking. Instead of being taken off a night shift, it's him firing someone for not doing what he expects him to do at work. And this just shift in attitude.
And the wife says, well, good for you.
Yeah, of course you should do such a thing. How dare he? I love all of that. And it's such a great, and that includes the sort of like, so yeah, the tuning stuff when they're changing is fantastically done. I love it.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that scene because that stood out for me too. And I love that overhead shot. But as you say, I love the class implications. I love, how, although it's part of this world, I mean, I do find it a little strange how everybody just stops driving. Like if you fall asleep at the wheel, you don't just stop driving, right? That's everybody knows that. That's one of the dangers of driving. Yeah, I mean, so there are things like that bother me. And then when they wake up, they don't seem to remember that they fell asleep. I mean, I get that you kind of have to buy this, right? But the idea that even though that's kind of baked into the concept, right, from that first scene where they're asleep in the hotel, they wake up and just don't seem to notice, oh, I must have dozed off, right? They can't notice that because then the whole city would be like, oh, I just dozed off. Oh, so did I. And you'd have a conversation ensue. So, okay, you kind of just have to buy that. But I love in that scene how they instantly adapt to their, like, oh, well, I'm wealthy now. So, of course, my morality changes. And yeah, that's within the universe. It's actually a serum of memories and all this stuff. But still, you and I know, like, there have been studies that show, like, wealth makes you a less moral person. Like what car you drive makes you a worse person to pedestrians.
Yes,
as you drive a fancier car.
And so I love all this sort of thing of how these people are changed and stuff. One of the things is that in all that, and I want to sort of talk about Keith Sutherland's character, Dr. Schreiber. And so one of the things that sort of, and again, this may be an easy interpretation, but I wanted to sort of touch on it, is this idea of human experimentation, this idea of people, and again, I'll be careful with some of the language I use, but like this ghettoization of these people, sort of like that have living in this thing and experimentation. Let's not deny that the black leather fetishization of these sort of the strangers and stuff, maneuvering things and shifting things around, and also, I mean, there's no political thing there, but they're definitely like overlords, aren't they? They are there to be seen as overlords, and then you have.
Today we'd say they're gaslighting.
100% they are gaslighting these people, yeah. Much like you think. But then you have the traitor doctor, played by Keith Sutherland. Like, he is one of the people being manipulated, but is working for the overlords, like the enemy. And I don't know, it felt to me like I was making sort of like Nazi comparisons, and this idea of sort of like, this idea of sort of people them experimenting on them, but sort of trying to sort of justify why it was being done and all this other stuff. And the way, and Kiefer Sutherland, I think is a very good actor. Actually, I enjoy him and stuff. But someone he's been the cool vampire in Lost Boys. He was in the cool westerns with young guns and all this other stuff. Like he's part of the Brat Pack. Like he's part of that cool generation. And so they then have him as this sort of like limping, bespectacled doctor and all this other stuff. Not to play him down as anything else, but like it clearly felt like they were sort of, I'd say like
casting against type.
Yeah, cast against type, but more than that.
But also, well, okay, so I saw less of a Nazi parallel. You're right. I mean, that's there. But I mean, especially with his name, but also the aesthetic. Like for me, that aesthetic instantly screams German, and it screams like German brutalism and German expressionism. And
especially some of the angles, like because one of the things I was thinking about is when they do the tuning at one point, like there's a twist. They feel like almost like a model of the city, and it's twisting. And I did think of that German expressionism of like Dr. Caligari or Nosferatu and those sorts, the use of shadows and all that sort of stuff. Like it's clearly there.
Yeah, for sure. No, you're right. And so to me, I thought like, oh wow, like I'm getting I'm
Yeah,
it's a Hollywood movie, right? But like this is so European
yeah,
in its influences. And I mean, I know French film, British film more than I do German film, but
mm,
uh I recognize it. I get what you're doing, guys, and like that's awesome. I even found myself thinking like about how this wasn't a big success.
mm,
And,
mm.
like people remember the Matrix. Nobody remembers this. This is like a footnote. And how, like, if you are acceptable and sort of like, I was thinking about the sort of like Disney aesthetic, right? If you are within that aesthetic and you're doing something that is intelligible to the audience, right? You can then, twist that by 15%, 20%, and the audience will go along with you and say, isn't that new and brilliant? But if you go in with something with like, like, I mean, if you don't have those ideas in your head going into this, I think this would seem like, what is this weird European movie? Like, I didn't go to see. I went to see an American science fiction movie. Like, why? I don't understand the aesthetic. I don't understand who, not only the plot and who these characters are, but I don't have a reference point for
Mm.
what I'm getting. And for that aesthetic and for anything. And I think that to me, that's just even though a better movie. I admire that myself more. I like stuff that's weird, but I think for a general public, that's kind of like it's starting within a narrower range
Oh yeah.
where, that's always going to be like a cult movie at best, right? Whereas the one that is more quote unquote accessible, it's more Disney, that might bomb, but it also might do $1 billion.
I also sort of yeah, I also see that, like you say, I can see why when this went to executives or sort of early screenings, people were like, we need Kiefer Sutherland back in to record a narration at the start of this because, like you say, I can imagine executives just going like, what is this?
Mm.
What am I don't understand what I'm watching. Who's the hero? Why am I following, you know, why do we have creepy Richard O'Brien doing things? Why is there a small child chattering at me? Like I can totally see why people the people worried about this. I can see why it flopped. I mean, this was
Yeah.
weirdly, it's one of those things where, um, if this film, probably the director's cut, if this film was to have come out now,
Mm.
in the emotion, this would definitely receive better. We're more, I think audiences are more open to that weird experience than
Mm.
they were 20, 25 years ago.
Well, the fucked up thing is if this came out now, it would come out on HBO Max. I mean,
Yes.
it would not come out in the theaters because
Mm.
it's not a franchise film. And it's not going to deliver the franchise film experience, right? I mean, one of the things that you just said about, like, having a hero, The Matrix has a hero,
Hmm.
right? Like Neo is, I mean, he's a tech guy, he's involved in some criminal enterprises, but there is no doubt that he is just an out and out goody goody, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And here, in America, we gotta have our unambiguous heroes. And the only place that that is okay not to have is basically an art house, adult fare, right? Um, Here, the protagonist, you know, might be a serial murderer of women,
Yeah.
carving them up, and I mean, that I don't think would fly today, even more so than back then.
Mm.
At one point, you see the cop slap a woman on the ass, and I thought,
Yeah.
oh, that's not dated well, but yeah, I think that this even by the end, like when Neo beats the machines, right? He tries to make a better world.
Mm.
When the protagonist wins here, he says, "Well, I can do anything I want." There's no. He doesn't seem like he loves his wife or this woman who he remembers as his wife, but he knows that's entirely self-interested based on his memories. Which, okay, that's true of all of us, right? Fair enough. But this is not an American hero. It's
No.
neither a hero, goody goody, or a sort of Clint Eastwood anti hero tough guy, right?
Yeah, no, I think one of the interesting things about that comparison between John in this and Neo in the Matrix is I would also is the stinger to the film, the sort of the the denouement, if you will. In the Matrix, as you say, like he beats it's not a definitive ending in the Matrix, it's a beginning. And he has his superhero ending, doesn't he? Sort of like, after beating the Mr. Smith and all that sort of stuff. And you see there's the scene of him in the phone box, and he says sort of like, I don't know how this is going to end, but basically I'm going to be a hero and I'm going to take you on. And then he flies off over the city. And it's sort of like, oh, he's chosen the side of good. He is the chosen one. He's going to represent the people. He's not God. He hasn't won yet. In Dark City, John completely manipulates the whole of the ship within the field in which it exists for his own self-interest, so that he can re-meet Jennifer Connelly's character, now called Anne. Meets her, and like you say, it's never entirely clear what he's going to. But he is God in this. He is identified as the only human that's evolved to have these abilities to tune, and he knows how the technology. He's sort of, he's been given these memories of how to do it perfectly, and we'll get to that in a moment. And it's left really ambiguous. Like you've identified that, the story sort of told you he's supposed to be a good person, but like, no, he's a god walking amongst these people now. He can do whatever the hell he wants. So if it doesn't go his way, he could restart everything, put everything back to sleep, and he could become the overlord. Like, there's a complete opportunity.
He is the overlord.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is a total totalitarian state. I mean, he's Kid Miracle Man, just not as in love with murder, right? Like,
that we know of.
Well, right. But I mean, he does still think his wife cheated on him, right?
Yeah.
Which apparently is motive enough. No, but I mean, he makes no claim that what he's doing is morally correct. And I love this. I mean, I think that's quite right. I think actually that's perhaps more respectable than somebody, claiming it's all for the good. Let's also remember he has committed genocide.
Yes.
All those Nosferatu stranger guys are all dead.
Yeah.
And presumably, that the one is left who has his memories. I mean, we see sort of like their terrain beneath the Discworld frozen, but we don't see them all die. But it's clear they're all dead, right?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing as well is, firstly, you're right. He's obviously wiped out. He's won in a sort of like, there is no peace. It's just a complete genocide of these people. But more than that, he doesn't liberate the people in it is totally a disc world, and I love the way you call it that. But in the Dark City, like, he doesn't liberate them. They continue to be in the assumption that their lives are their lives, and they're gonna, he has created this area of light. Doesn't really explain how he's done that, but he's created this area of light with a beach. Fine.
Oh wow. So you, in the theatrical cut, it's not clear how he's done that.
You see him start to change things around, and you see water sort of spilling out of the side of the ships and stuff. But I'm not entirely sure how he's done light. No.
Okay, so one of the things that I like most about this is that it is clearly a Discworld, and you see shots of it from a distance.
Yes, I've seen. You see that. I've seen all that, and
okay.
there's like a beam in the middle and stuff, and that sort of thing. But
okay, yeah, I mean, every movie has to have a beam shooting up into space.
Sky
right?
beam. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but you do actually see in the director's cut the Discworld once the waters have filled out, and as you point out, he's way more concerned with making a beach than freedom, right? But you actually do see it rotate, and a sun comes into view. And the idea, so obviously, like, the aliens have just kept it stationary with a sun of some sort behind it, which begs the question, why did they do that when they clearly could have just rotated this thing? But at least there was an explanation.
Okay, I may have missed that, but it may not be in there. Okay, that does make more sense, and that's it. I think, but like, you're right. Like, he doesn't liberate people, does he? He is doing these things to his own ends. Because we lose the only other person that was on his side of it is the detective played by William Hurt, is killed. So he goes off.
Mm.
So he can't. He's not there. And Dr. Schreiber, I can't remember. Is he killed or is he? No, he just exists, isn't he? He's sort of left. So.
Well, the aliens sort of attack him and realize he's betrayed them, but I'm not sure that we see what happens.
You never see a body. Let's put it that way. So he's there like as a single entity, like he is God, like walking amongst people, and he can now has full control over reality. So yeah, it's fascinating. The end of it. This isn't. It's almost like. It's presented as a good ending. Oh, it's a happy ending, but there's so much more that sort of like you're going, there's, he hasn't done everything he should have done.
You're right.
Yeah.
I think it should present itself as a more self-aware ending, but bittersweet. But I do think that it knows it.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
Like it's a Hollywood version of the self-aware, like this isn't a happy ending. I think the whole sort of going out and seeing now Anna on that pier is hauntingly beautiful. And this idea of sort of like, right, well, you're right that the doctor survives because he has that conversation with her about Anna, right? Where the doctor says we can't save the memory banks, right? Like we're starting from zero. You can't bring your wife back. She's not your wife. And then he leaves. But I find that scene really haunting. Is this kind of like, I know this is stupid, but I love this human being. And I think, kind of what a great love story, right? Even more so than The Matrix, which curiously is grounded in a love story too. It's weird, like if to do movies about reality isn't real, yet I love this person is real.
Well, that's the grounding factor. I mean, coming back to what makes this human, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is when we've talked about memory and this idea of self and what makes us who we are, like we're really reliant on that. And I think when you have films like this, like, and this that thing around narrative, we need something to hold on to. That what makes us human. What if you're going to take away all these other things, or you're going to question all this other stuff, what is it that still makes us human? And love is usually the thing that comes through. Sometimes it's done well, sometimes it's done like a bunch of crap. Like, the Harry Potter films of like, why couldn't Voldemort kill Harry? Because of love. And you go, that makes no sense. It's complete garbage. But in this, it's
I didn't make it that far.
Right. Well done.
I made it through like 4.
Yeah. And then, you like you say
Wait, are you allowed to say that as a Brit about Harry Potter? I mean, aren't they going to come and
I'm probably going to get a visit from some men dressed in black later on. Sort of like some Richard O'Brien's going to turn up in a big hat and deal with my memories. I think one of the things is like this idea, like Trinity and Neo, and we sometimes need these love stories at the center because it's what keeps us human. It's what it's human interaction. It's this idea of love. And enduring, and they always do it as it's got to be romanticized, romantic love. I think that's sometimes I think is the downside of some of these. One of the things that's fascinating about this idea of love is I'm rewatching the whole of The Walking Dead. And one of the things that, for good and ill, some of it's really, I think some of it's fantastic, some of it's not so good. One of the things I find fascinating is the relationship between Carol and Daryl. And this idea of like they are just friends and they've got this real sort of love between them, but it's never sort of like romanticized. And they keep sort of coming and they will defend each other and do the best things for each other, but it's never romanticized. And I love the fact that they are just there for each other. And we're never brave enough to do that in a film. That sort of platonic, that true sort of platonic love, it's got to be romanticized. That sort of becomes quite frustrating. But I get why it's there, because it's supposed to show that although he is now omnipotent and can manipulate this world in any way he can, he's grounded by the love of this woman. I think that's sort of what it's there for.
Well, let's talk about love for a second. I mean, I love you, dude, and we have never met in person, despite having spent, 180 hours podcasting together. And yet, were you really visited by the British Men in Black and imprisoned, I would absolutely book a flight to England to come try to get you out of jail in a second. Um, and I would go so far as to risk my freedom to do so. Um, you know, there's a completely platonic relationship.
Mm.
Not that I think either of us would be scared to, say feelings otherwise. I don't think any of us we're not homophobic, nor would we expect anything. But the point is, that kind of love is not what we see in films.
No.
I also think of like, the reality is most romances, even if they lead to marriage, don't last.
Mm.
It's not the lifelong, the reason why it's a happy ending in Shakespeare is because he knows when to cut.
Yes.
And I think about the brilliant season 2 of White Lotus of, sort of like, oh no, the passions died, right? Oh no, right? Like the spark died. Yeah, the spark's been dead for a long time. But I love her so much, right? Like, and I hope I'm a good dad. And, I mean, love is complex. I know a friend here who says she's older than me, and she says she's not even sure if romantic love is sort of real love or if it's really based in sexual desire and the ego. And maybe it's a good thing that transitions into at best a kind of partnership, of abiding, sort of soulful love. So all of that just leads me to say, yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting that we have to have this kind of like romantic love, which is, I think, a legitimate kind of love, but also like one of the most fleeting, kinds of love you could have.
I agree, and I 100%. In fact, I would probably agree with your friend actually saying that. And I think that sort of that romantic, that spark, that passion, that lust, or whatever, is almost like an instigator for a lot of things. And if you're lucky, that then transitions and translates into, a partnership or friendship and platonic that sort of can sort of sustain a marriage and stuff, and you have the rest of it. But it becomes that bond. Because that's the one that's truly long lasting, I think that's true. But you're right, we can't sort of we don't sort of seem to trust that on film when we're showing that. I mean, I remember, and this is completely when Frozen came out, and they were like, oh, it's sisterly love. The whole thing's about sisterly love, true love in the sense of like sisterly companionship and sort of like friendship and that sort of thing, rather than having the usual Disney prince hero. They still have that in there secretly. They try and sneak it in other ways, but like that's still there. And there was this it was all in the news, and people were like, "Oh, Disney's showing this," and da da da. And you're like, "Yeah, why is it such a big thing that we struggle to show this?" I think it's bizarre, but yeah, it's interesting that in these films we need to be centered by a romantic passion. It has to be a sort of like a love that binds them, a sort of a love that defines the ages. And you hear all these things, and you go like, "Wow." Sounds like a lot of work. What's going to happen in 5 years when they're sort of like, a bit sick of each other? And so I understand that from a narrative point of view why it's there. But yeah, sometimes I just think I think this is why, and again, I think sort of like, the schmaltz of Disney, I understand it, but I think it's why the opening sort of like that opening section of Up, that everyone refers to, works so well, and why no one is possible. It's not possible to get out through that without shedding at least one tear. Like it works because it shows that thing, that development of support and companionship and love in that way, in a genuine and sort of authentic way. But I think with Hollywood, you need the shortcut. So you and I have said it 100 times before with the films. You need that shortcut, that shorthand that says, "Don't worry." Here's what's going to happen, sort of like they're in love or whatever, and it's that's what it's there for.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also think that Hollywood especially doesn't trust something that isn't grounded. And when you think about, and grounded by that I mean like in what audiences expect, right? I was reading I think what's his name, who did like Towering Inferno and like Land of the Lost, and um, I'm forgetting his name, but I was reading his reaction to Star Wars, and he said like he could not understand how a movie that had no basic love interest was, that Star Wars is just, not a love story.
Mm.
And Princess Leia's there, and Luke kind of romances her, but that's not, even
It's not the
like
point.
really a
Yeah.
B plot, right? It's not like, I'm going to slay the dragon and win the girl. No, no, like the girl's there,
Yeah.
but and he was flabbergasted by
Mm.
something without how that lacking that could win such popular attention. And so I sort of feel like with a protagonist who is potentially a serial murderer of women, and um, and a German expressionism, sort of aesthetic, and all of these things going on in this film, I can see how the idea of a love story grounding it would be reassuring, or is kind of a nice thing for audiences and
Yeah.
producers. Where I give this film credit is it's not really that. And when he meets her, it's sort of like, I mean, it prefigures in some ways like Eternal Sunshine for the Spotless Mind,
Mhm.
like, this kind of like, okay, I'm manipulating. I know I'm manipulating you. You don't know me. You're somebody else now. I also know we could fall in love again. And, maybe he will in 5 years, they'll get tired of each other and he'll figure out how to rework that memory
Yeah.
serum stuff and reboot her and keep her in love with him. I wouldn't put it past him. I'd like to see that movie, frankly.
Mm. Darker City. Yeah, but you're right. I think one of the things as well is that let's sort of like, to really focus in on certain things. We'd it's also about
I
this.
find that so charming. The sequel has to be called Darker City.
Oh, it would as
like,
well. It would 100%.
Yeah.
But the thing is that, like, you not only is it this thing about the hero and the love interest. I think it's one of the things that I think one of the reasons we need this is the kind of person that John becomes and Neo becomes, and I think it's because they are the Superman. This idea of someone, this is why Superman has Lois Lane. This is why sort of Superman has Mara and Pa Kent. It's this idea of the connection to humanity, isn't it? Sort of like, what keeps them connected to humanity? Their love of this person. Like, you need that thread, that connection. Otherwise, they are terrifying. Hence, Miracle Man. And this is where I think Miracle Man, you and I both sort of like, espouse about how great this book is. It's the fact that, like, when he does become Miracle Man, he sort of sheds his alter ego, and he presents himself to his wife and says to her, like, I can give you this, like, you can join me in this thing. And she's like, no, this is madness. I can't cope with this. You see that there is that, like, he doesn't really have that. The difference between Miracle Man and Superman is Miracle Man sort of sheds that connection to humanity in the same way and lives above it and becomes this sort of savior figure and everything. And the same, even for Kid Miracle Man, like, he's lived with them, but in amongst them, but has never had that connection to humanity. So when it comes to the big sort of like tussle, he has neither of them really have any qualms about plowing through people to get to the end goal. And so that's where I think we get scared when someone's presented with this kind of power, but they're like, oh, yeah, but they need to be connected to humanity. We need to show that there's a goodness there, that there's a core to them that can be trusted. Otherwise, I think it's even put it this way, even in The Boys, like Homelander as this villain, like, they give him a son to try and sort of show that, like, he has this like connection. Like, they're never fully confident in really separating them out in that way to sort of
now,
like,
you should point out that that's only true in the TV show.
yes. Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm talking about the TV show.
comic.
No. Yeah, in the TV show. And so exactly, we're taking this back to Hollywood. This idea of a producer.
Mhm.
Yeah, Garth Ennis does not have any concerns about this.
Garth don't give a fuck about
Yeah. He's
Homelander
got-
being a
yeah.
total asshole.
Yeah, he's got no concerns about separating them from humanity. But in the book, in the TV show, that's what they're trying to do, and they're still trying to give Homelander that idea of humanity a little bit. And I find that fascinating that we need that. And John and Neo are just the same representations of a superhero or a super being, a godlike being connected to humanity.
So, I mean, this gets me to probably my biggest objection to this film. You know, I really like the idea that these are the children of alien abductees, right? And, you know, all those, you know, stories of alien tests on people, you know, whatever. Here is a continuation of that. I don't like that it's phrased as having a soul. I don't understand why they haven't figured out this answer to memory and identity by now, right? Like that's not that complex. You know, I get that it's a cliche, but I can kind of go with it. This sort of point of like you were looking in here points to his head, you know, and the implication being you should have looked at your heart. And so I'm in love with this girl, and exactly as you say, right? Like that grounds the character, that grounds the narrative. You know, okay, that's a cliche. I can kind of accept it. But where I think, you know, interestingly, this movie and The Matrix for me really fall apart is where the human being has powers. I cannot, at the end, the thing that bothers me most, I love this Discworld. I love this setup. I don't need all the aliens to die, but I love the, you know, trying to sort of manipulate love into coming back into existence. There's so much that I love about this film. How is he the first human who has developed powers? He's not. The only explanation that would possibly make sense is that he's some sort of like hybrid between the two species, or he's secretly a stranger in disguise or something, right? Humans don't have the capacity to do this. If they did, you would see other humans doing this to smaller degrees, but it's never been manifested on this level. This is, you know, the same thing's true in The Matrix. I'm with The Matrix until at the end of the second one, he's able to do it in the real world. And then you're like, oh, no, the only explanation is it's all a simulation. You're in a simulation inside a simulation. And that's not what they end up doing, right? Because they don't know what they're doing. Here, I sort of feel it has a parallel problem where, you know, he should not have these powers. The fact that he does have these powers is never even explained or addressed.
I agree. I think I don't want I don't want a full explanation. I don't want someone to be exposition about how he was experimented on as a child and was given these powers, or by accident, or there was a a secret stranger that gave them power so that he could evolve into this thing. I don't need all that, but at least like allude to the fact that there needs to have been some sort of intervention for this to have happened, because the doctor, Keith Sutherland, Dr. Schreiber says, "Oh, he's evolved," and you're going, like, "How? Why?" Because there doesn't seem, like you say, it's an explanation they give, but it doesn't make any sense. I want there to be some sort of illusion, because at least with the Matrix, again, it's not till later that they give this. I think later on, this is where they fill in canon, which is the Star Wars cop out. But this idea of like you're not the first, like we've had this before, it'll happen again. Like if you were to have it in this, of like they recognize that this man has to be killed, like Mr. Hand or whatever, the chief stranger. If there was a sort of thing of like even if you have a single line of like we've dealt with this before, it seems to be happening at a faster rate. At least then go, oh, there is something bigger going on, but we don't really have to cover it. But like they're dealing with this one something. I agree with them having that thing.
See, I mean, the thing about The Matrix, like you pointed out, is like that scene where it's like this is another control system. This has happened multiple times, which I really love. Happens prior to Neo at the end of the second movie using his powers in the real world, which just shouldn't happen, right?
No. Yeah.
That's where it jumps the shark for me.
Yeah.
and so, but here it's almost like they just embrace that problem from the start, and never, you said evolved, but the way I took that line about evolving is like the human species has evolved
Mm.
to develop these powers, which, there are accounts of psychic powers. I don't have a problem with that. A version of the world in which humans have telekinetic powers, um, that's fine. But like, all you need to do is mention that, have some sort of line about how his DNA isn't entirely human. Somebody did something along the line. In all the successive revelations, it would be pretty easy, right, to have something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, you're right. There's not enough explanation for it, and I think again it wouldn't take much to do a throwaway thing that gives you at least a little bit of light onto it, which would be. So I agree with that, and I do feel the same with, like, again, Neo works when it's within the simulation because it's manipulating programs and all that kind of stuff, and you can go, oh, it's within a simulation, so it works. The moment he does it in the real world, again, like I think the whole world watching just went, I'm switching off now. I think you've sort of, let's say, you've jumped the shark, you've blown it. So yeah, no, I agree with that. One thing that, sort of as we sort of get towards the end, the one thing we sort of touched on, I want to talk about, is the finale. So he is captured. He's taken by the strangers to a place to have his, basically have given new memories and reinstalled back into the Matrix, if you were, back into the Dark City. I love the plot that Keith Sutherland uses those memories, because it's like it's almost like there's that cop out of manipulating time travel, of going, well, I've laid all these things through time without having the complexity of time travel, because it's like, I've laced your new memory set with all this knowledge. Again, think about the Matrix, where he's like, well, I know kung fu. Yeah, this is it. Before that, but with even more thought process going into it. And so I love that he gives him a lifetime of learning just through implanted memories. I think is brilliant.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I do have to add the asterisk, like, through the whole thing, like the idea of chemical memories in a tube is sort of like, again, a little German expression. Is like, I can kind of get away with it stylistically, like, okay, but I'm not sure how this works.
Especially when he's putting them together, he's like a little bit of Teenage Rebellion, a little bit of this, over that. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I understand that.
So my problem with that scene is, how is the Doctor, like, they've never established he's able to make his own chemical concoction. Like, well, you add a little, plutonium, and then you have a childhood sexual experience. How I don't know how this works, but so that is my objection. And he's got the other needle because the aliens notice he's got the other needle, and that's how they find him out. What, dude? Put that in your pocket, man. Like, But anyway, I mean, those are minor quibbles. I think that emotionally it works. Intellectually, you're right. I mean, it's just a brilliant idea. The idea of being able to, I like your comparison to time travel, like being able to sort of effectively time travel without really doing it. What's the fucking difference, right? I give you the memories of me there, and we're off to the races. And that's a way of encoding information, right? We talk about like encoding information in DNA. He's encoding information in the synapses, in the memory. I think it's pretty brilliant.
Yeah, it is. It's fantastic, and the way it sort of happens, and then once he reaches, it all sort of embeds, and that's it. Then he's able to use those powers, and sort of like, again, it's sort of like, the CGI isn't always great, but like the frame, this thing he's been sort of like trapped on, melts away, and now he is Neo in the real world. Like, he can start to manipulate things around him. However, this has a bit of a double-edged sword, and I think it's down to both budget, imagination, and special effects capability. You see him being able to melt the world around, change things, but then it becomes two guys floating in the air arguing over a dagger flying backwards and forwards, and things shooting out the ground, like pillars coming out the ground. And I'm like, if you really want, again, I understand it looks cool, look, it's still good, it's still very cool, but like, this is one of the things I always claim about, like, Green Lantern. those constructs, the will constructs, you're like, yeah, but if you got the ability to make whatever you want, like, you've got to be really imaginative. So I feel like there should be, if they had the ability, if you were to make this now with CGI capabilities, like you'd do so much more with manipulating matter and sort of different bits and pieces. It still looks good. I still like it, but it still feels a little bit constrained, if you will.
It is probably the sequence in the film, and I thought this watching it, where I thought it's the only sequence where I thought I'm bored.
Yeah.
And that's saying a lot. I mean, like, look, I noticed, when we were like 16 minutes into the movie, I was like, oh wow, so much has happened. Like more has happened in 16 minutes than in 30 minutes of most movies. And I'm, really cruising along. I think you're right about that. The two things that bother me the most, like, again, you have telekinetic powers, right? Rip the walls out and crush the other person in a ball of metal, right? There's so much you can do. It's the, like, I'm going to fire psionic bolts and you're going to fire psionic bolts. And I'm like, and they fly back, like they're hit sometimes. And I'm like, does it just matter who gets there first?
Yeah.
And then I start thinking about like Dungeons and Dragons. And the other thing that bothers me is, the knife thing is not the best. But then the villain, having been hit with the knife that's been turned around on him, is then hits a water tower. And, although the protagonist is not thought about, John is not thought about just crushing him, right? John makes this entire skyscraper rise so that the villain can hit the water tower. And then I'm like, oh yeah, because they're scared of water. So apparently, like, water melts them like gremlins, and hitting the water tower, like, somehow sprays this entire Discworld. There's something there that they're going for that I don't think comes off. The whole water thing, I think, doesn't really work.
It's again, I honestly think this is a limitation of special effects at the time. Like, they're trying to go for something I think that they aren't yet capable of demonstrating on screen. Because there's a scene earlier in the film when Mr. Hand, or whatever it is, the Richard O'Brien character, goes to what is he called? Yeah, Mr. Hand goes to see Dr. Schreiber, and he's in that sort of like pool there, isn't he? Swimming, and he says, our aversion to moisture, to this, and even Dr. Schreiber says to him, he says, well, the reason I come here is because it's the only place I can get peace and quiet. I can get a moment's peace. Like, so they keep alluding to this thing about how water, but you never actually see like one of them get sprayed with water or accidentally touch water or something, because they are also covered head to foot. Like, when they're in Dark City, like, they wear big hats, they wear the long coats. Like, you almost need a demonstration of, well, what happens if they do get caught with water?
Yeah.
So get it on their hand or get it on their face or something. Just a little bit of a thing would be very, very helpful, because for that final bit. So I agree with that. But I like what they're trying to do, and I like the fact. But like you say, it's a bit clunky.
Yeah, you're right. But I don't even think that the water tower exploding, it's neither logical nor really shown that it kills all of them that are above ground. And also, if that's the case, you don't need to slam the villain into a water tower. You just need to raise the water and crash it down. You have godlike psionic powers. I mean,
also more than that, he seems to be able to manipulate everything. Like, he's not just moving things; he can manipulate things, turn something else into water.
He's creating water, right? Because they don't have that much water on board the ship to flood the force field.
So the ending is a little clunky. I agree, but it serves its purpose. But it's one of those films where, like, I can sort of see the director and the writer going, like, look, we've done all this really cool stuff. Sort of got to finish. We've got to bring it to an end. We've got to beat the baddies, and we've got to do this. All right. It's clear that this is clearly not where their mind is at or their head is at. That this is all very perfunctory, which is fine.
Well, what I imagine is there was a much better version of this before it got budgeted.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. Or even they reach the special effects guys and we're just like, we can't do that. Like, that's not
Yeah.
possible yet. And I wonder if that is the case. And you know, because a year later you get the Matrix. The Matrix does
Mhm,
some of the similar things, and they invented like bullet time and all this other stuff that,
mhm.
and it was very costly. So, and I think maybe it was possible, but they were a bit like, we're not spending that level of money, like you say, on this weird little film that is clearly not going to make us money back. Yeah, very, very possible. Anyway, we are running into time now. So let's come to our final thoughts then on Dark City. So, Julian, what are your final thoughts then on Dark City from 1990?
God bless you, Scott.
For your point, for the
You know,
theatrical cut, or the director's cut, so yes.
yeah, I mean, you're the one who's limited by the, I went straight to the director's cut, and I was quite pleased. This is for me a sort of miniature case of The Man Who Fell to Earth, where I just, kiss your ass and thank you for helping me to see this movie, because like this is a movie that I've been aware of for my entire life, it feels like, and yet I have never watched this all the way through. And if I saw, a little bit on television, I was like, oh, that's kind of visually interesting, but what the hell is going on? Um, I kind of love this movie.
Mm.
I think it's legit, not just good, but kind of excellent. So I recommend this to people. I mean, I think this is a kind of forgotten gem, and I hope that it gets more attention. So thank you, and this is part of why I besides learning about stuff that I've already seen, and seeing it through your eyes in another angle and thinking about it, this is another treat about doing this podcast. So I get to watch stuff that I haven't seen in any real way.
Yeah, no, I think what is about this film is because I didn't watch it until probably about 18 months ago. First time I watched this, and it's one of those films where I'd known about it for years. I'd heard about the director's cut, and but I'd seen like people mention, oh, it's if you don't watch the director's cut, it's almost impenetrable. It doesn't make any sense and all this other stuff. And I was like, oh, do I really want to sit down and try and pass this film out? Or is it too much hard work? Can I be bothered? And I kept seeing visuals from it, and I was like, I want to see this, even if it's like just to experience the visuals of this, like whatever this 90s film was. And I remember sitting down for the first time and watching it and being like, oh, this is actually really good. Like I'm enjoying this. Like it's weird and it's, it's not perfect by any stretch, but like it's clear what they were going for. I think some of the casting and ideas work really well. It's got more themes and ideas in the whole in it than most films have at all today in this weird little sci-fi film. It's got a great cast. It looks fantastic. Sort of like I'm loving it. Yeah, it's just one of these films. I'm like, as you say, was overshadowed a year later by The Matrix, and everybody remembers The Matrix, and nobody remembers Dark City, and it's become some sort of like cult film that is watched, probably by a few people, but wholly deserves to be rediscovered and re-examined in the light of more modern aesthetics and stuff. Like, I think this is definitely a film that needs to be revisited. And yeah, it's fantastic. I do think I need to watch the full director's cut, and I will be seeking it out to watch it because I think it's well worth doing so. I mean, we've recently talked obviously about the director's cut of Water's World and being like, yeah, it was more of the same for like an extra 40 minutes. Like it didn't make a huge heap of difference to that film. But this is like Blade Runner in that like the theatrical cut is fine, and I really like the theatrical cut. But from what you've said about the director's cut, it's about I think 9 minutes longer, but it also removes like the narration and some of the bits and pieces. Like it cleans things up and makes it a much more interesting film. So yeah, I highly recommend anyone go check this out. Like it really is a good film. And when we get to our final season review of sort of like where everything stacks up, I'll be interested to see how this sort of stacks up against in retrospect, will it be one of those sort of films that stands out for us?
Yeah, I think it will. And I just want to say the comparison with Blade Runner is, apt. I kind of like the earlier versions of Blade Runner, but this does more. with one of the ideas in Blade Runner that I've always dug on and always faulted Blade Runner for not going into, which is that fake memory thing and the pain of the fake memories. And this has a similar theme, but develops in a richer way.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the fact that we, this idea, as you've talked about, I think this idea of self and how we are embedded, our self is embedded in our memories of what's gone before. Such a good film. Really enjoy it. But we're not done. Obviously, we're still going through this season. A much lighter tone, I think, as we're going forward into the next film. We're going from 98 to 99. We're going to be leaving the 20th century after this next film because we're going to the Iron Giant next. This is our animation film for this season.
Isn't it 99?
Yeah.
I think yeah, 99. So it's right up against the Matrix.
Yeah, so we really are. Those late 90s, there was some really good stuff. The late 90s is some fascinating stuff. 99 in particular was a big year. You get sort of like the Matrix, you get Fight Club, Iron Giant. So yeah, the Iron Giant is going to be an interesting sort of story.
Yeah, like Magnolia. I think American Beauty was 99. 99 is sort of like one of those banner years in cinema history.
Oh yeah, it really is. It's sort of a real turning point for a number of reasons. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about a film that I have read, and I have very fond memories of the book, the Iron Giant, and we see how we sort of compare that to from the original. I don't think it's sort of based on the source material, but there's obviously the small kids, like small children's book, versus this film that was done. So
I've never read any of the source material.
Have you not?
I can't read. No, I don't read. No, I read a lot. I didn't even think about the source material.
Have a look. It's very. I mean, don't get it. It's fine, but have a look at it because it's very interesting. There is obviously a short children's book. I think it's literally about 60 to 90 pages long. Like, it's very short. But yes, we'll discuss that on the next episode. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us in Dark City. I hope you enjoyed it. What are your thoughts on this? Have you watched this film? Do you think it's worth revisiting? Do you tell people about this film, or do you shy away from it? Let us know. Find us on social media at PodTimeSpace. And more than that, go find us on your podcasting platform and leave a review. If you want to hear more about what we're doing as well, go check out our Patreon. It's www.patreon.com/20CG Media. That's 20 CG Media. Loads of stuff going on there. We're still trekking through the Twilight Zone, and there's a whole other heap of stuff, me doing my 30-minute thoughts as well. And go check that out. Keeps the lights on for us as we do future endeavors. But for now, Julian, thank you very much. It's been an absolute joy, this one. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
My massive pleasure. Yeah, me too, man.
It's been a good one. And ladies and gentlemen, we shall see you on the next episode.